The wire told us she was nothing. That's where we found her. East Perimeter, 3:30 in the morning, coiled against the lowest strand like she'd been there for hours, maybe longer. Private Dunst hit his light, and I came over, and what I saw was a woman maybe 40 years old in civilian clothes that had been good clothes once, a week ago before the mountain got to them. No bag, no visible kit. She wasn't injured in any obvious way. She wasn't moving. She was watching the ridgeline to the northeast like she had a specific reason to. And she didn't flinch when Dunst's light hit her face. Not even a little. I made a call I make 100 times a year. Displaced civilian, probably separated from a group, hypothermic, needs the aid tent, and a hot meal, and then a conversation with our interpreter. And then, when comms cleared, a ride to the NGO processing point at Fob Kelman. A safe call. A correct call. The kind of call I have made correctly 100 times. Looking back, the certainty I had about what she was is the part that embarrasses me most. I put Sergeant Vic Poole on her, told him to get her warm and find out where she came from, and I went back to the operations room because we had a problem. A real one. The problem was a place called the Corral Defile. I won't take you through the whole tactical picture. The short version, a 12-man reconnaissance element. 2 teams, staggered, had gone into the ground northeast of our position 14 hours earlier. One team had made its objective, radioed in, and gone quiet in a way that was not the usual quiet. The other team had never reached theirs. Our imagery showed a terrain feature that every set of eyes in the operations room, including mine, had been reading as a navigable ridgeline with a saddle crossing. By 0200 it was clear the imagery was wrong, or we were reading it wrong, or both. The saddle didn't exist in the way we'd drawn it. There was a gorge somewhere in that ground that wasn't on any map we had, and it had swallowed one of our teams, and we had 23 soldiers ready to move at first light to find out what was left of them. I was looking at the imagery when Poole knocked. "She won't go to the aid tent, sir." "Then make her." "She won't move. She's standing outside the ops room." I went out. The woman was standing in the doorway with her arms at her sides, and she was looking at the satellite printout I'd left rolled on the table behind me. Not at me, at the printout. And the way she was looking at it, the way her head tilted 3 degrees, the way her eyes moved from one edge to the other, was not the way someone looks at paper they can't read. I said, in the flat, slow English people use when they have already decided someone won't understand, "You need to go with Sergeant Poole." She looked at me for the first time. Then she pointed at the printout. "That gorge," she said, in English with an accent I couldn't place, "runs north-northeast. What you think is the saddle crossing is the east lip. There's no passage there. The passage is 400 meters further north, where the drainage switches. It's a 40-minute walk from your current staging." The room was not large, and it went very quiet. "Where are you getting that?" I said. She didn't answer that question. She looked back at the printout. "Your team that went quiet. They're below the east lip. They went in looking for the saddle and found the drop instead. If they're alive, they're in the drainage at the bottom. There's an overhang at the north end, sheltered from the wind line. That's where I would go if I'd made that mistake in the dark. I am a careful man. I have been careful my whole career, and it has served me and the people I'm responsible for. But I have also spent enough time in bad ground to know that there is a kind of knowledge that looks different from educated guessing, and what this woman was describing didn't sound like a guess. It sounded like a recitation. I asked her name. She didn't answer. I asked how she knew the ground. She said she'd been through it. I asked when, and she looked at me with something that wasn't impatience and wasn't contempt but was close to both, and she said, "Several times." I went back and forth in my head for 30 seconds. I'm not proud of what was going through it. I was thinking about the optics of bringing a civilian woman into a recovery operation, thinking about the liability, thinking about what my battalion commander would say when he found out. I'd handed the approach route to someone I found at the wire in the middle of the night. I was not thinking about whether she was right. That's the part I come back to. What stopped me from saying no was not logic. It was the way she looked at the terrain on that printout, and the way she did not look at me, like I was a minor obstacle, and the ground was the real conversation. I told her she was attached to the element. I told her she stayed in the middle of the formation and did exactly what I said. She nodded once, the way someone nods when they have already decided to comply with whatever is reasonable and ignore whatever is not. We moved at first light. I will tell you what I saw. She walked like someone who had been in that specific ground before, not like someone who knew mountains in general. I have plenty of that in my element, men who grew up in terrain that would end most people, but like someone who had been in this mountain, this drainage, this particular configuration of limestone and scrub and loose shale. She didn't hesitate at decision points. She didn't check the imagery I'd given her. She read the ground itself, the way you read a room you've lived in for years, the hand that drops when the footing shifts, the slight lean of her shoulders that told the man behind her that the surface 30 meters ahead was going to be wrong in a specific way, the twice she stopped and went down on one knee and listened before she moved again. My point, man, Corporal Aldous has 14 months of mountain patrol behind him. He's good. He runs the terrain well, and he makes clean decisions in the middle of the night. 40 minutes into the movement, I noticed he was watching her. Not the way you watch someone you're worried about, the way you watch someone you're trying to learn from. That registered, and I filed it somewhere. She made one hand signal I didn't recognize, not from any manual or course I've attended, but the 6 men behind her, without a word from me, spread to exactly the interval she seemed to want. Later I asked Aldous what the signal meant. He said he didn't know. He said they just did it. At the 400-meter mark, she stopped and pointed north. There was no visible path. There was a slot in the rock face that could have been a shadow. She walked into it. I followed her, because by then I had run out of other options, and because something in my chest was telling me, quietly, the way the right things always arrive quietly, that she was not guessing. The slot opened into a chimney passage, 40 meters long, that came out above the drainage. Below us, in the shadow of exactly the overhang she had described, were 7 men, alive, cold past cold, 2 of them needing to be carried, one with a leg that had been set badly against a boulder and would need a surgeon's attention before it healed, correctly, but alive. She didn't say anything. She went down the slope ahead of us and checked each man with hands that knew where to put pressure, and what to look for, and what to leave alone. She had a medical kit in her pack that none of us had noticed when she joined the element, which told me something I didn't like about how carefully I had looked at her. When she finished, she turned to me and said, flatly, "Third one has a femoral issue developing. He goes up first. 20 minutes on flat ground will cost him. We got them out, all 7. Got them up the chimney, across the drainage switch, down to the staging point. Linked with the second team and got all 23 men off that mountain before the wind shifted." I did not ask her any more questions in the field. I was watching her and thinking, and whatever I'd been carrying in my chest, since the operations room had grown into something I still didn't have a word for. The debrief was 2 hours after we were back inside the wire. Our battalion intelligence officer ran it. Halfway through, when he got to the part about how we'd found the passage, he stopped and looked at the woman sitting at the end of the table, and he put down his pen. Then he said her call sign. Just the call sign, quietly, the way you say or fits word you weren't expecting to find in a room where it shouldn't be. Bear Ridge. The woman didn't react. He set a folder on the table and opened it and pushed it toward me. I'll tell you what was in the folder, without telling you everything that was in the folder, because some of it stays in the folder. 11 prior deep reconnaissance operations in that ground over 4 years. 11, solo or near solo. She had been running terrain surveillance in the Corral Defile since before my unit was assigned to this theater. She had filed reports that went up a chain of command I didn't have visibility into. She had been pulled from 2 prior operations when her cover was blown and had rebuilt her network both times without asking anyone for help doing it. The classification on the file was high enough that our intelligence officer had gone slightly pale. By the time he finished reading the cover sheet, the last entry in the folder, dated 8 days before we found her at the wire, was a field notation in her own hand. 2 lines. The first line described the false saddle on the Corral Ridgeline and the exact location of the drainage passage 400 meters north. The second line said, "East lip compromised. Recommend element avoid until confirmed." Nobody had read it. The forward routing had broken down somewhere in the 8 days between her hand and our operations table, and 12 men had gone into ground she had already told someone was compromised. I sat with that for a moment. 8 days, and a routing failure, and 12 men in a gorge we'd sent them into blind. And the person who'd already written the correct answer was sitting at our wire in the dark, waiting for someone to let her in. The intelligence officer closed the folder. The room was quiet, in the way rooms are quiet after they've absorbed something they can't argue with. She was looking at the table, not at us. He asked if she needed anything before he arranged her transport. She said she needed the imagery corrected in the system before the next element went in, and she described 4 additional terrain features that our map had wrong. She named their grid coordinates from memory. He wrote them down. She watched him write, and when he was done, she stood up and walked out of the room. And that was the last I saw of her. Later that day, I went back to the east perimeter. I walked to the spot where Dunst had lit his light, where the lowest wire strand had a rust patch I'd noticed at 3:30 in the morning. I stood there for a while and I looked at the ridgeline northeast, and I tried to work out what 11 operations meant, what it cost to build that kind of knowledge alone, what she had seen from this exact angle on all the prior times she'd come out of that ground, and what she had calculated about us when she decided to stop here. I couldn't work it out. Some knowledge doesn't translate. What I took with me when I left was a small piece of that wire, rust on one end, the strand cut clean on the other, where some prior iteration of this perimeter had been moved and reset. I carry it in the left breast pocket of my kit, have for the 3 years since. It's not a souvenir, it's a correction. She was not lost. She was never lost. She was waiting at our wire because our wire was where we were, and she needed to reach us faster than she could reach anyone else, through normal channels. And she had made the calculation, correctly, that a sergeant who was careful enough to stop and look would eventually look past what he assumed he was seeing and actually see it. She was right about that. It just took me 30 seconds longer than it should have.